Hello. Story 1. My uncle had extended an invitation for me to oversee his residence while he was away on holiday in Europe with his family. My aunt and my cousin had departed earlier, preceding my uncle, who needed to conclude some professional obligations first. Upon finalizing his tasks, he requested that I manage the house for a period of several weeks. He was aware of my strong desire to experience living independently, and thus he presented this chance for me to do so for the very first time. He stipulated that I was not to invite any friends over or spend excessive time in the yard. I did not fully grasp the reasons behind this restriction, but I hypothesized that he wished to prevent me from being outdoors extensively due to the significant accumulation of snow, which could potentially lead to an accident. After providing me with numerous directives regarding the care of the property, he supplied me with a substantial quantity of food, stored in the refrigerator before his departure. I must concede that initially, the experience surpassed my expectations. I did not feel any discomfort being by myself. In fact, I felt liberated to act as I pleased. Everything proceeded faultlessly until the middle of the night, when a noise abruptly woke me. Feeling more astonished than frightened, I promptly rose and surveyed my surroundings. There was nothing discernible, only the deep darkness of my uncle's bedroom, subtly illuminated by the powerful moonlight penetrating through the window. I gazed out the window to ascertain if it was snowing, and to my astonishment, not only was snow actively falling, but it appeared that a blizzard was in full effect outside. Startled, I peered outward, unaware of the true nature of the situation unfolding. I quickly turned around upon hearing the identical noise originating from the front door on the lower level. This was the instant my heart began to accelerate. I contemplated the possibility that something might have been propelled against the door by the wind, but I lacked certainty. I descended the stairs, activating all the lights as I went, and examined the exterior through the peephole of the front door. Perceiving nothing, I cautiously opened the door slightly, taking care not to allow the cold or snow to enter. To my dismay, there were footsteps leading directly to the door. I forcefully shut the door and secured the lock, breathing heavily. Who the would be out? I contemplated the possibility that something might have been propelled against the door by the wind, but I lacked certainty. Descended the stairs, activating all the lights as I went, and examined the exterior through the peephole of the front door. Perceiving nothing, I cautiously opened the door slightly, taking care not to allow the cold or snow to enter. To my dismay, there were footsteps leading directly to the door. I forcefully shut the door and secured the lock, breathing heavily. Who the big would be outside in this weather? I muttered under my breath, glancing around the interior of the house, as though attempting to determine the appropriate course of action. I hurried to the back door and looked through the glass panel. Visibility was severely limited by the darkness and snow, making it difficult to discern anything beyond a few feet away. But through the swirling snow, I was absolutely certain I saw a very small person walking away from the house. They appeared to be a child, no older than 9 or 10 years of age. A brief lull in the wind provided a moment of clearer vision, and for a split second, there was definitively a child moving around outside the house. I experienced fear, but also a sense of concern for the small child. I ascended the stairs to retrieve my mobile phone and then contacted emergency services to report the presence of the child near my residence. I remained by the back window, peering into the snow-laden darkness to see if the child would reappear. But they were gone. When the police officers arrived, I provided them with a more detailed account of the situation. We were standing in the kitchen as I spoke, but our conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the front door. One of the officers instructed me to remain in place while they both proceeded to ascertain the identity of the person at the door. As the officer opened it, the same child from earlier was revealed. An officer brought the child inside, clearly expressing concern, as the boy was not adequately dressed for the weather, wearing only the light sweatshirt instead of a thick jacket or similar clothing. The other officer stepped outside to scan the area for anyone else before closing the door behind him as he re-entered the house. The child's facial expression was difficult to articulate, as it seemed entirely devoid of emotion. The officer posed numerous questions, inquiring about his parents' whereabouts and his activity, but the boy spoke very little and appeared to be simply lost, as if mentally disoriented. It all felt so surreal, occurring directly in front of me, only shadows melting into darkness, yet simultaneously feeling utterly unreal. What child wanders around in a blizzard during the middle of the night? Why did he knock on the door? Why was he alone and expressionless? We did not receive answers for a span of weeks. By that time, my uncle had returned and no longer required my services to watch the house. Among the few utterances the boy made, he had informed the investigators that the house I was staying in, my uncle's house, was where he resided. However, approximately 2 weeks after I discovered him, another family positively identified the boy as their child who had been missing for several months. As I followed this news, my mind was racing, but events continued to become more peculiar. Less than a month afterward, another missing child was located sitting on the street in front of my uncle's house while he was once again away on vacation. Ostensibly, there is no correlation between the two missing children, but this strikes me as an excessive coincidence. It prompted me to question everything, including why my uncle had desired nobody else to visit, and for me to avoid spending time in the yard. Was he involved in something of which I was unaware? Why did he leave several days following his family's departure? Was it possible he was keeping individuals somewhere? Naturally, I acknowledge that I could be completely overthinking the entire situation, but the truth remains unknown. The police conducted an inspection of the house subsequent to the discovery of the first boy, and my uncle cooperated fully with everything. Thus, it could indeed be a remarkable coincidence involving two missing children being found outside his home, or it may not be a coincidence whatsoever. Story 2. Winter holds the distinction of being my most cherished season of the year. There is a particular quality associated with the sensation of falling snow and the festive holidays that elevates my mood throughout. Nevertheless, I reside in a rather cold state, frequently experiencing substantial snowfall during the winter months. Having been employed part-time as a driver for Rapid Routes, a delivery service, for almost 3 years at that juncture, this made the occupation considerably more challenging, as road clearing operations would take a significant amount of time. And even once cleared, the heavy snowfall would quickly recover the roads. Although this rendered the job dangerous and at times even impractical, I typically chose to drive on days characterized by heavy snow and obstructed roads. My rationale was that few others would be on the road, and fellow Rapid Routes drivers would likely opt to remain home, affording me access to a significantly greater volume of orders and the potential to earn more income. Furthermore, customers generally tended to offer larger tips, recognizing the considerable difficulty they were imposing by requesting delivery during a blizzard. That year, the situation remained consistent, and it was the middle of December when a night of intense snowfall occurred. I was unable to commence deliveries until approximately 7 or 8 o'clock due to my other employment, but as soon as I was able, I began driving as usual. Very few vehicles were present on the road, and the application for my job with Rapid Routes was displaying lucrative delivery opportunities. I completed 2 relatively swift orders and was returning from a customer's residence when the snowfall intensified. Visibility was dreadful, and the roads were not being plowed with sufficient frequency. My vehicle was not substandard. It possessed all-wheel drive capability and all-season tires, but the snow presented a significant challenge. I reduced my speed to stop at a sign and found myself barely able to resume motion as my tires merely spun beneath me. Finally navigating through the intersection, another delivery request appeared on my mobile device. I considered it for a moment, engaging in internal debate about whether to accept it, before ultimately declining and closing the application. The roads were excessively hazardous, even for me. The specific street I was traversing was not far from the primary town area, so my objective was simply to get as close to town as feasible. Hoping that more snowplows had cleared the roads there, I drove cautiously, maintaining a speed of 20 miles per hour on a road posted for 45. As I proceeded through the adverse conditions, I could barely discern something substantial positioned in the center of the road ahead. Having been unable to perceive it until it was too late, I applied the brakes forcefully, and while my vehicle did halt in time, the rear tires skidded behind me, dragging my car off the road and into a deep layer of snow. Fortunately, it was a gentle, low-speed impact, but this did not ameliorate the predicament I was in. My car was now completely immobilized in the snow, and I recognized the necessity of assistance. I composed myself, remaining calm and collected, then activated my hazard lights and retrieved my phone to contact roadside assistance. I provided the individual with my location, and he then stated it would take approximately 15 to 20 minutes for him to arrive. I readily agreed and expressed my gratitude. Leaning back in my seat, I was relieved I had not accepted any further orders, as this situation would have been considerably more complicated. A few minutes elapsed as I simply waited there, observing the snowfall, before I detected a flickering light in my side mirror. It was challenging to see, but I managed to distinguish that it was an orange light, flashing gently and approaching me. As it drew nearer and parked on the side of the road behind my vehicle, it appeared to be a typical work vehicle, with caution lights mounted on top. Glancing back at my phone, it had only been 4 minutes since I had placed the call, so this person was remarkably early, but I had no intention of complaining about someone arriving ahead of schedule to extract me from a ditch. After waiting inside my car for an additional couple of minutes, I heard the distinct sound of a door slamming shut behind me and observed a man walking towards my window. Once he was a few feet away, I lowered the window a few inches. "Hi, sir. Did you need assistance here?" he inquired. "Yeah, I called a few minutes ago. I just needed help getting back on the road," I replied, although it felt somewhat awkward explaining myself, given the situation was quite evident. "Right, let me see what I can do for you," the man said. He proceeded around to the rear of my vehicle and began inspecting it, presumably searching for a location to attach a hook. Now, I have never experienced this before, but I always presumed they attach a winch to your vehicle and pull you out. I was completely unaware of where they connected it, or any other details, or even if that is the actual procedure they employ. The man remained behind the car for a short time as I observed him in the rear-view mirror. Then a sudden surge of cold air permeated the cabin as the man had opened the trunk. I turned back and saw him holding the trunk partially open while visually scanning the interior of my vehicle. "Sorry," he muttered, forcefully closing the trunk. Again, I was not familiar with the specifics of this process, but it struck me as exceedingly strange that he would randomly open my trunk in that manner. I could not conceive of any plausible reason why he would need to open it. My suspicions began to heighten upon noticing his apparent lack of knowledge, and I started connecting the events. I quickly dialed the roadside assistance number once more. Several rings occurred as I waited anxiously before the same individual as the previous time answered the call. My stomach sank. "Hey, I'm just a couple minutes away. Did you need something else?" Just then, the man returned to my window, informing me that he required my keys and that I needed to exit the vehicle for a minute while he prepared it. I kept the phone pressed to my ear and awkwardly told the man that I needed just a minute as I was on a phone call. He did not respond, but instead simply stood there, observing me, as if desiring to overhear my conversation. I was doing my utmost to avoid panicking, with the man still positioned next to my door. I rolled the window up. The man immediately began knocking on the window, demanding to know what I was doing in a rather aggressive tone. I then activated the door locks, and as soon as he heard that, he attempted to forcibly open my door and began shouting at me. I was absolutely terrified, knowing I was trapped and unable to move. As this was unfolding, I heard another door slam shut from the truck behind me and saw a second man sprinting towards my car with an object in his hand. Then, an extremely loud horn blared from behind us, followed by brilliant lights shining directly at my vehicle. The two men rapidly retreated to their truck and immediately drove away, revealing the authentic roadside assistance truck behind them. Two men exited the genuine truck and approached my vehicle to confirm that I was unharmed. Apparently, I had inadvertently left the call connected, and the men heard the events transpiring, prompting them to rush to my aid. Furthermore, after notifying the police, I learned that there were multiple incidents strikingly similar to mine that had occurred during heavy snowfall. The men would purportedly drive around seeking individuals who were stranded, then proceed to steal their cars and rob them under the pretense of being roadside assistance. I would not even doubt the possibility that they were responsible for placing that large object in the street that caused me to swerve and slide off the road. I am fortunate for how the events ultimately unfolded, and I do not believe I will ever operate a vehicle in adverse weather conditions again. Story 3. When I was younger, my family and I would travel north to engage in ice fishing activities. My parents had acquaintances who owned several cabins situated in a location that was essentially the middle of nowhere. There was a small gasoline station located about a mile away, but beyond that, it would require approximately 20 to 30 minutes of travel to reach anything else. En route to our destination, snow began to fall, and my primary desire was simply to get settled in and play some games. The drive to reach where we were going was an 8-hour journey, and we anticipated arriving around 4 p.m. It was January, so the sun was already beginning its descent, and I felt quite fatigued. We pulled into the parking area designated for our cabin and commenced unloading our belongings. The cabins were equipped with smart locks, requiring only the input of a code to access the interior key for unlocking the door. I retrieved my backpack and suitcase and proceeded to enter the code, but I observed that tracks were already present leading up to the door. I brought this to my father's attention, and he suggested it was likely the cleaning personnel or someone similar. I accepted his explanation and proceeded to open the door. Upon entering, I noticed a small amount of water on the floor. Again, I assumed this was residue from the cleaning person. Apart from that, however, the interior appeared satisfactory and exactly as I remembered it. I went to the bedroom I consistently occupied on previous visits and began to unpack. But when I went to draw the blinds on the window, I saw tracks again. It appeared as though they originated from the woods and extended towards our house, and judging by the ongoing snowfall, they had to be recent. I informed my father, and he stated he would investigate. By the time we had finished unloading everything, however, the snowfall had intensified significantly, shifting from a light sprinkling to almost blizzard-like conditions. My father remarked that if anyone had been out there, they were certainly no longer present if they possessed any intelligence. He prepared SpaghettiOs for my mother and me, and we watched a movie, after which I retired for the night. I was awakened a few hours later by a thumping sound on the wall, which seemed to be coming from outside my window. I attempted to return to sleep, but the sound recurred several more times, and at this point, I was not even fearful, but rather quite annoyed. I got out of bed and checked outside the window, observing nothing. The snow had somewhat lessened, making visibility slightly better. However, I again noticed the tracks, situated in almost the identical location as they were the first time, emanating from the woods. I ensured the windows were securely locked before returning to bed. As there was little else I could realistically do about the situation, the following day, I recounted the events to my father, who seemed skeptical. We went outside together, and indeed, there were human footsteps leading from the woods to our cabin, specifically right up to my bedroom window, then proceeding to the front door, and finally returning towards the woods. We had been to this location before and were aware that aside from the cabin, there was nothing for miles around, and nobody typically camped in the woods, especially during the winter season. My father contacted his friends and apprised them of the situation, but initially, no one could effectively do anything. After a few hours, however, they brought over some miniature cameras that connected to an electrical outlet, providing a live feed of the interior of the home. We installed them inside to enhance our sense of security. It was somewhat bothersome, but it was preferable to err on the side of caution. We departed for the lake a few hours later, with my mother consistently monitoring the cameras to ensure no one else was inside the cabin. Upon arriving at our fishing spot, we all left our mobile phones in the vehicle while we fished for a period. When we returned to the car, however, my mother had received a multitude of notifications, indicating that the camera had detected movement. My father immediately called his friend and asked him to go check the cabin or contact the police. His friend remained on the telephone line as he entered the house, carrying some form of firearm. After a few minutes of silence, he reported that nothing was present inside. I recognize that he should have awaited the arrival of the police, but my father's friends are simply a distinct type of person. He did contact the police afterward and explained the circumstances. We did not obtain any video documentation, however, because the inexpensive cameras only displayed a live feed and did not possess the capability to save footage. We stayed with my father's friend for the subsequent few nights, but kept the camera operational in the cabin. Predictably, on the day of our departure, it once again detected movement. My father and his friend promptly went over there, but once again, nothing was found inside, although this time there were tracks leading from the woods to the cabin, the very same tracks I had observed on the first and second days. My father considered following the tracks, but my mother strongly advised against it. It is undeniably eerie to contemplate that someone could potentially have been inside while we were asleep or observing us from the windows during daylight hours. Fortunately, nothing ever materialized from it. Thank God. But it remains one of the most unnerving experiences of my life. The subsequent few times we visited the area, we chose to stay in a different cabin, and no unusual events occurred. My father's friend indicated that they never discovered the identity of the individual or the reason for their presence, and I suppose the person ceased coming after we had left. Bye.